In my What is Metagaming in 2025 video, linked in the description below, I covered some of the basics of metagaming, but it just really scratches the surface. To truly understand the disagreements, the arguments, and sometimes discomfort that happens at our tables, we need a deeper and broader framework to work with. We need to talk about the magic circle. Wait, I got something for this. No. Whoa, hey, let's just do the and the information that crosses its borders. We're going to label this meta-knowledge. In game studies, the magic circle refers to the shared imagined space where the game takes place. When we sit down to play, we agree to step inside and live by its rules and reality. One form of metagaming is the act of using information from outside the circle. This information itself is what we call meta-knowledge. This meta-knowledge comes in atypically three forms. First is game knowledge. This is your mechanical understanding of the rules. It's knowing how a rogue's sneak attack works. It's knowing the monster's stats from reading the rule book. Now, second is observational knowledge. This is picking up on real-world cues. You see the GM pull out a huge dragon mini before you've even entered the room, or you hear them rustling through books when a certain NPC is about to appear. And third is interpersonal knowledge. This is knowing your GM's personal habits. You know, everyone has a tell when their NPCs are lying, or that your GM likes mimics, so you wind up attacking every chest or chair or throne or whatever it is. The arguments start because every table has a different idea of how this meta-knowledge should be used, which stems from clashing player philosophies. Now, a player who enjoys mastering systems can see using meta-knowledge as a form of skill. It's a way to win a challenge. Now, this player is using player skill over their character's ability. A player who wants a believable, consistent world might see the meta-knowledge as a shattering of immersion, and it can almost feel like you're cheating on the world itself. And the player who just wants a good dramatic story, well, they might only view it as one metric they judge it by. Did it or did it not improve the story? Understanding the framework, the magic circle, these perspectives, what meta-knowledge kind of is, and the potential for reason for why someone plays is the first step in moving beyond the arguments. And this framework helps us understand the source of the conflict, but what are the actual arguments for and against metagaming? What is the case for preserving immersion, and what is the case for embracing what really is the inevitable? Immersion versus inevitability. Let's get into one aspect of the conflict itself. It's a tension between two competing goals, a desire for deep immersion and role-playing versus the psychological reality that metagaming is impossible to avoid. The most frequent case against metagaming is about preserving immersion and fairness. The goal for many is to inhabit a character and make choices from their limited perspective. Using outside knowledge shatters that suspension of disbelief. This can also devalue character choices. Why invest in skill points and knowledge skills if another player can just look up the answer on their phone? It makes the in-game mechanics for gaining information feel kind of pointless. It also feels unfair to the GM, who spends hours crafting challenges and mysteries only to have them trivialized by a player who reads a module ahead of time. This robs the game of its discoverability and suspense. On the other hand, the case for metagaming is based on a cognitive inevitability. It is psychologically impossible for a player to truly forget information they already possess. To demand that a player perfectly simulate ignorance is to demand an impossible feat. It adds a cognitive load to playing the game. Beyond that, some metagaming is actually essential for the game itself to function. We agree to keep the party together even when our characters dislike each other. We agree to follow the GM's plot hooks. This is good metagaming. It greases the wheels to keep everything moving. This all leads to the metagaming paradox. The conscious decision to avoid an action because of out-of-character knowledge is itself an action based on the same knowledge. If you know a monster is immune to lightning, Choosing not to use a lightning spell is just as much of a meta decision as choosing to use it because you know it is a weakness. You're in a no-win scenario where any choice you make is tainted by meta-awareness. Recognizing this paradox is key to having a more nuanced conversation about meta entirely. So we're caught in a paradox torn between immersion and inevitability. In order to navigate this, we have to establish a clear baseline. Thankfully, we have a few thoughts to help us along the way. If we can't perfectly separate player and character, what kind of knowledge is a character supposed to have? What does a character actually know? The baseline. Are we really left to languish with this so-called paradox? To try and solve it, we need to ask, what does a character actually know? Before we can accuse anyone of metagaming, we must establish a baseline of legitimate in-character knowledge. This baseline could be built from two potential sources: the world they live in and the life they've led. First is a common knowledge conundrum. Every world has a body of information that most of its inhabitants know. It's just not believable to assume a character living in a world full of monsters has never heard stories about them. They'd know basic geography, the names of political leaders, and common folklore. Of course, the GM can decide what's common knowledge. And critically, common knowledge can be wrong. It can be superstition, folklore. Maybe the common wisdom is that a ghost is weak to salt, but that's just a baseless rumor that wastes your time. Cue the cries for that's not fun. This turns a player's game knowledge into a potential liability. Now, the second source of your character's knowledge is backstory and profession. Your background, your class, your archetype, your skills are all the primary source of some unique expertise. A wizard from an academy knows arcane theory, but not necessarily how to survive in the woods. A cop knows the precinct's boundaries, but likely nothing about ancient Mesopotamian history. This is also where the GM can shift their perspective. Instead of asking players, why would you know that? They can start asking themselves, is there a good reason why this information should be unknown? Remember that in general, characters in many role-playing games are viewed as professionals. They choose a life of danger and adventure. It's not just sensible, but expected they would have done some homework. A monster hunter would have read bestiaries. A tomb raider would have studied some history. From this view, knowing a monster's weakness isn't necessarily metagaming. It's role-playing a competent character. Finally, there's one other area to review. If you are using and working within an established setting, how is it depicted in the books, the text, and the art? This is all a valuable resource to consider. Playing a fantasy game? Does the image of a tavern show several fantasy denizens in it all together at once, or is it all human? What kind of technologies are on display? Is it virtual or augmented reality for cyberpunk hackers or historic galleons as spaceships? So we have a set this rough baseline for what a character should know. But this isn't just about the players. The GM and even the game designers are a huge part of this equation. So how do the different people at the table and the people who made the game approach this problem? What are their perspectives? GM, players, and designers. We've built this rough baseline for character knowledge. Now we need to look at how the three key stakeholders at the table, the GM, the players, and the game's designer, each approach this divide from a unique vantage point. The Game Master is both curator/architect of the world and the arbiter of the rules. They can get frustrated when out-of-character knowledge trivializes the work that they put in. In response, GMs develop several strategies. Some use open communication, such as in Session 0, to set expectations. A popular tactic is reskinning, make everything a bear, taking the stat block from one familiar creature, but describing it as something completely and entirely new, making the player knowledge of the rule books a little bit unreliable. Some GMs even control information flow by passing circuit notes or using private text messages to individual players. Now the player is caught in a dilemma. They are both a role player trying to be immersed and sometimes a strategist trying to succeed. Conscientious players will develop their own strategies. The simplest is to just Ask the GM, would my character know this? Now this does respect GM authority and keep the game flowing, but for others, this out-of-character questioning breaks immersion. Another is to proactively justify knowledge with their backstory. As a former acolyte, I've studied religious texts about the undead. If I recall, one of their potential weaknesses may be, and a very powerful one, is to roleplay ignorance, deliberately, making suboptimal choices because it's true to the character's personality or just purely their lack of knowledge. Finally, the game designer is the architect of the entire meta game. Their philosophy is encoded directly into the rules. Some games prioritize simulation, as people will call it, while newer games often embrace the meta itself, giving players mechanics like hero points or inspiration or momentum to direct the influence of a so-called story in ways that their characters cannot. And we've seen how GMs and players cope with the rules. But often, the most elegant solutions are built right into the games themselves. You may or may not be playing these. So how have designers pushed the evolution of game systems over the years to solve or help resolve the metagaming debate? What can we learn from games like Gumshoe, Fate, and Blades in the Dark? System really can matter. The answer is that they have developed a huge array of mechanics that completely change how we interact with knowledge, moving from gatekeeping information to empowering the players themselves. The traditional model, seen atypically in D20 and Dungeons & Dragons, treats knowledge as a skill. You make an intelligence check when necessary, roll a die, and sometimes that determines if you remember something or if you know it. This is simple, but a single roll can bring events grinding to a halt. Investigative games like Gumshoe kind of fix this. Their philosophy is that finding clues shouldn't be the challenge. It should be interpreting them. If your character is an accountant and they're in a room with a dodgy ledger, they're going to find the clue about the secret bank account automatically. No roll needed. Now this guarantees the action continues to move forward. So-called narrative-first games like Fate Core treat knowledge as a core character trait called an aspect. An aspect like foremost expert on ancient ruins is always true. Players can invoke this aspect by spending fate points to get a bonus or a reroll on a check related to, go figure, ancient ruins. Knowledge becomes a narrative resource to be spent for a mechanical effect. Finally, modern procedural games like Blades in the Dark have the flashback mechanic. Instead of planning a heist for hours, you just go into it. When you hit that locked door, you can spend a resource called stress. Now, you do this to have a flashback to the last night when you stole the key or you bribed a guard. This solves the metagaming problem of endless player planning by making it a core in-game ability that costs a resource. We've explored the theory, the conflicts, some perspectives, and the systemic solutions which some games have. We've covered a massive amount of ground. So what's the final takeaway? How do we synthesize all of this into a practical framework that you can bring to your gaming table? The addendum. All right, let's try to bring this all together. What is the grand lesson we can kind of learn from diving deeply into a subject like this? It's that metagaming is not a problem to be solved, but a creative tension to be managed. The goal is not to be 100% prohibitive, but to channel it constructively. For me, the synthesis of everything we've discussed is this. A blanket condemnation of metagaming is untenable. The act of playing is, in and of itself, a meta activity, and some forms of it are essential to playing a game and getting it to function. The real distinction isn't between metagaming and pure role-playing, but between creation and construction versus disruption and transgressive uses of out-of-character knowledge. A disruptive metagaming, like we said, is selfish. It's like reading the module ahead to spoil the mystery. Constructive metagaming is cooperative. It is the out-of-character conversations coordinating attacks to make them feel like a team. It's players using knowledge of characters' backstories to create a powerful role-playing moment. It's building on the narrative together. The most effective way to manage this is to make the implicit rules at your table explicit. Establish a social contract of knowledge in your session 0, an addendum. You might think about adding some of the following as key concepts or points. A common knowledge. Agree on your world's baseline of knowledge. External sources. Agree on a policy for using phones and books at the table. Game sources. what game books are or are not usable as in-character knowledge, and a knowledge protocol. Agree on the procedure for knowledge. Is it a role? Is it a question? Is it role played out? By having this conversation openly, a group can transform this nebulous, sometimes emotional issue into a clear, agreed-upon set of table rules. This is how narrative authority moves away from just the GM and the dice and is placed in the hands of the entire group, empowering everyone to work towards a well-played game. The divide between player and character isn't a flaw. It's a powerful engine for drama and choice. If this deep dive has helped you understand some aspects of what's going on, please like the video and subscribe for a different perspective on role-playing games.